while you fan, you also pray down there. Pray that I may do what I was praying just now, not speak for myself, but for him. And as he pleads with you for his world, and to help you to realize that it means you and not somebody else. Now, I'm going to start quite a long way out back this evening. I'm afraid this will be a little bit highbrow for some of the children, but of course all of you intellectual giants will like it, I hope. I'm going to start way back before the time of Jesus this evening, and I'm going to talk about the masses that I know very well, and I feel as though, in a sense, I'm speaking for them, championing them to the United States. These masses have always been in a state of sullen despair. There was nothing they could do about it. They were helpless. The educated people, the people at the top, the little fringe at the top, did nothing for them. Their own religions did not encourage the people at the bottom nor the people at the top. I have had a chance to study Buddhism and Hinduism and Mohammedanism pretty well. I've worked among those people, and I don't believe anybody here nor anybody in the United States or the world will ever contradict me when I say this. There was very little hope for the masses of people in these religions. For example, Mohammedanism has what they call kismet. Now, kismet means fate or destiny in English, and it means that you're just exactly where God wants you to be and you can't do anything about it. Now, when you have that attitude towards that life, the people at the top say, that fellow's getting just what God wants him to have, I won't bother. And the people at the bottom say, God wants me to be this way, there's nothing I can do about it. Now, in Hinduism and Buddhism, they have what they call karma. Karma means, among other things, that we have reincarnation. I see there's quite a lot of talk about that in our foolish talk about that in our magazines lately, as I think foolish. I don't believe in it, but they do. They believe that if you are wretchedly poor and in suffering and in debt and oppressed and in despair, it's because in your previous incarnation you were bad and you're getting what you deserve. And so the only way to get out of this situation is to be good this time. Never complain, that's the first thing. Never you protest, because if you do, it'll be just too bad for you. But if you're good and take it, realize you deserve it in this incarnation. Perhaps in the next one, you'll be a beautiful bird, or you might even be a prince. But if you complain, you'll probably be a worm for the bird to eat. And so, in these other religions, there was no hope for the people at the bottom, the 90%. People at the top believed they were favored by the gods and that the people below were not. But when Jesus came, that thing was quite different. People always keep asking me, well, aren't the religions almost alike? Why do we ever emphasize one above the other? Well, I'll tell you, in one respect, the religions are diametrically opposite, and that is in respect to compassion for the underdog. There isn't any, because it's against their philosophy in the other religions. They're getting what they deserve, but not so with Jesus Christ. When he came, he opened his ministry by saying in Nazareth, when he stood up there before his own people, the Spirit of the Lord, he said, is upon me. He's anointed me to preach good tidings to these poor people, to set at liberty these people that are being oppressed, to open the eyes of these people who are blind. I take that to mean literacy, too. And to set free those who are in prison, and to proclaim the kind of a world the Lord wants. Diametrically opposite to the position taken by all the other religions that I know of in the world. And that's the way he lived, too. Every minute of his day, he was just walking down the road looking for a chance to lift people out of that misery. If they were hungry, he would feed them. If they were sick, he healed them. When he met a beggar, he didn't throw him a coin. Now, there has always been charity in all religions. Indeed, I know places where they cultivate beggars so that you will have somebody to throw coins to. Always believed in charity. We had to have somebody who needed it. But Jesus never threw anybody a coin. He healed them. He lifted them. He brought them up to a level where they didn't need a coin. If they were blind, he didn't give them a coin. He opened their eyes. If they were lame, he didn't give them a coin. He made them walk. And every minute of his day he was spending trying to lift people out of that misery in which they were. Did you ever know there was such a striking contrast between your religion and that of all the other peoples of the world? Well, nobody has ever contradicted that, and I've said it in every continent. I believe it to be unanswerable. But unfortunately, he told us to be that way too. You remember, well, there's so much to remember. I could spend the rest of the evening almost quoting statements about this thing from Jesus. He said in the Last Judgment, when the king shall sit on his throne, he'll separate the people, the nations. I'm always intrigued by that word nations. Maybe he means nations too. And he'll say to the nation on the right hand, come, you blessed nation, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you. I was hungry and thirsty and naked and sick and in prison and a stranger, and you helped me. They'll say, when did we help you? Inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, you've done it to me. And then to those on the other side that didn't do any help, he says, depart from me, you accursed, into the everlasting fire. I was hungry and thirsty and naked and sick and in prison. You didn't help me. And they'll say, when did we see you that way? And he'll say, inasmuch as you did it not to the least, you did not to me. Well, I don't need to go any further to tell you the story of the Good Samaritan. And everything else he said was all the same as he lived. It was a new idea. Compassion for the underdog was born on Christmas Day. Now, unfortunately, the church got a little of it, but we shone more in our attitude toward God than we did in our attitude toward people at the bottom. Jesus had both. As I said, I think I did anyhow the other day. He said, Kaihu to his father, can I help you? And Kaihu to everybody in need. That's all he spent his time looking for, a chance to help somebody. He didn't love people because they were lovable. He loved them because they needed to be loved. And the early church got a little of it, especially the first few months. You read about it in the New Testament. But it didn't understand him very well. Oh, there was a change in the attitude toward women. If you ever travel around among other religions and other countries, you'll notice that in most of them, especially in Islam, Mohammedanism, but also in others, women are not on a level with men. In many places, the question is really a real question to them. It'll make you laugh, but it doesn't make them laugh. Are women people? They aren't treated like people. In many places, they don't believe in their being educated. They aren't capable of it, don't have the brains, and if they did, they'd make mischief with it. So they keep them under, submerge them in all the Near East. That's the case with women, and in most of the world, excepting where the Spirit of Jesus came. Nobody ever before or since treated women as beautifully as Jesus Christ did, lifted them as he did, loved them as he did. And if you women have what you have today in America, you can give Jesus Christ the credit. He got it all. Indeed, you've got to such a state now that you own 70% of the wealth of this country, and we men are beginning to wonder what's going to happen to the next generation. You women don't seem to be worried about that. Well, there was another group of people that Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus, got into the church. The attitude toward lepers. In the pre-Christian period before Jesus and during Jesus' time, whenever they saw a leper in the distance, they were so scared at him, although as a matter of fact, leprosy is not as dangerous as tuberculosis. Yet they were so scared at him because they looked so horrible that they chased them away off and let them starve. But when Jesus was here, he never chased a leper off. He wasn't afraid to touch him. He healed him. And the church began to gather the lepers together as a beautiful Christian act instead of chasing them off into horrible isolation. And then they had the same attitude toward orphans and toward unfortunate people. A little of it down through the centuries. Even toward slavery, there was a change. Paul didn't believe that slavery was wrong. He did beg Philemon to set Onesimus, his slave, free, or at least treat him like a brother. But that's all. He told the slaves to obey, just as though they were obeying God. And it was not until the middle of last century. Have you ever thought how nearly 100 years ago it was? It was not until the year 1860, when the Civil War was fought in the United States, that we began to realize as a nation that slavery is not Christian. It took us that long to see the implications of it. But I'm here tonight to talk to you about a new thing that is happening. I want to help you to see the development of it. The nations in this century, for the first time in history, nations, not only the church, not only a few Christians, I don't think all Christians, I don't think half the Christians, I don't think a fourth of the Christians understood the implications of the compassion of Jesus. But not only Christians in this century in which you live, but the nations are beginning to learn compassion from Jesus Christ. It's a wonderful century. I want to compare it to last century. A little while. Take the attitude toward children. A century ago, there was no society for the prevention of cruelty to children. There was a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals. For some strange reason, the human race has always been more kind-hearted toward animals, if they were domestic animals like cows, than they have been toward their own children. A little girl down in Philadelphia was being beaten by her foster parents. A tubercular woman living next door lay there a while and listened to that girl scream. And then she rolled out of her bed and tottered down the street. This tubercular woman did, begging the people to come to the rescue of little Ellen Terry, the girl who was being beaten. And they all said, nothing we can do, no law against it. They have a right to beat her all they want to. But she came to William Byrd, and she said to him, Mr. Byrd, please come to stop this terrible thing that's happening to this little girl. Mr. Byrd said, I'm sorry about it, but there is no law against it. Now, he was the president of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And so this tubercular woman said to him, why, this little girl is an animal, and there's a law against persecuting animals. Why, he said, I never thought of that. She is, isn't she? He went to the court. He proved that this little girl was an animal. Those foster parents were prosecuted, and the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children began about a century ago. Never was anything like that before. And here's another thing that's new, that shows how the compassion of Jesus has begun to work. A century ago, the soldiers were treated horribly. As a matter of fact, the soldiers were a pretty disreputable lot. Nobody ever became a soldier if he had any self-respect. They're not like they are now. Our armies are a good cross-section of all of us. They're drafted, and your boys are in the army, and they're just like the rest of the American people. An awful lot of fine boys out there. But they weren't that way then. And the reason was they were treated awfully. When they were wounded in a war, there was no disinfectant, and there was no anesthetic. They just had to take it wide awake. And they got gangrene as a rule, because they didn't know what to do about it. If their legs were cut off or their arms, the chances are they would die of gangrene. Now, they didn't know about germs in those days, and so they died a horrible death. There was one woman with a Christian heart who just couldn't take it. She was a young girl, of course, when she first began to realize this. She heard about it, Her name was Florence Nightingale. And she said to her parents, very well-bred, high-class people in England, I'm going to be a nurse, and I'm going to help those soldiers. They were horrified. Why, they said, nobody ever becomes a nurse excepting a prostitute or a drunk. That was true of them. They were a disreputable lot, and they treated those soldiers in an awful way. But she went over to France, and she stayed in a convent there, and she studied nursing with Roman Catholic sisters. Almost became a Catholic herself, but didn't. And then came back to England, and then she went out to Crimea to the war that was going on then, and she started decent nursing for those soldiers for the first time. And the Red Cross was born. There never was any until less than a century ago. And then another attitude, another thing that has changed enormously. At the beginning of this century, I have one advantage over you. I wish I were young like you folks look out there. But I have one advantage over you. I've seen some of these things I'm talking about. At the beginning of this century, I went over as a boy to the place called Plymouth, Pennsylvania. It's in the midst of the hard coal mines. And there they took me to see the coal breakers. And there I saw a coal breaker, a tall, slanting thing where the coal goes rattling down, and little children all along the side of that coal breaker, faces black all over, pulling the slate, throwing the slate out of the coal all day long and not going to school. Doesn't happen anymore. Labor has changed, whereas some of us are almost as much afraid of labor now as we are that the women will take everything over. They're getting so powerful. And but thank God for that. It's a new era in which we've come. All you have to do is read the books of the last century, and you see what cruelty there was to the man who did the hard work. And then another thing happened. We began to get well off. It pays to be kind. And I think part of this was due to the favor of God, that we were beginning to have a little compassion. We began to have money. Some people began to get a great deal. One of them was John D. Rockefeller. Now, I didn't say he got his money as straightforwardly as he ought to. Those big tycoons were smart and ruthless, but there were some people around him whom he trusted, and they said to him, now you'll die with that money and you'll just make you wretched. Why don't you use it for good purposes? And they persuaded him to start helping the health of the world. And the Rockefeller Foundation has gone out and attacked one epidemic after another. As you go across the world, as I do, you'll see what they've done. Why, in my boyhood, in the early part of this century, Asia was frightened at cholera. Great epidemics would sweep millions of people into death. Cholera only lasted a day or two, and then you were dead. Frightful pain for a day, and then death. It's all gone now. Very little of it indeed is ever to be heard of. Bubonic plague, smallpox, typhus, yellow fever. Now they're attacking malaria. One of the most amazing transformations in the earth, in the history of mankind, has been going on because we have compassion for people who have diseases. And the philanthropies are attacking it along with missions. Well, that also brings up one problem that a lot of you smart people have thought of. In the old days, the epidemics and the fact that the babies died, half of them before they were a week old, died of tetanus because they didn't know what to do with them. The foundations and the missions have also stopped that. And now the population of the world is zooming. And the problem is how to feed all these people. We don't know what to do about it yet. We've got to increase the food supply of the world faster than we ever did before, or else do something about these babies that don't die, and about these epidemics they no longer have that kept the world's population down. Now it's doubling every few years. Now another thing that happened early this century that I still remember. There was a new evidence of the compassion of Jesus. I haven't told you very clearly what I'm talking about, but I'm going to now. Until this century, the compassion of Jesus was found only, as far as I can find out anywhere, almost exclusively within the church, and only a part of it. But this century, it has burst out of the churches. It broke bounds, and now you find it in most anywhere. It's a new thing, unlike anything history ever saw before. In your age, you're too young to know about this, most of you. But it's happened in your lifetime, that the world is not any longer the world it was. For example, when Woodrow Wilson had declared war against Germany, some of you older people remember those 14 points. I was in Princeton when he was a professor there, and I remember very well the idealism of that man. He was way ahead of his time. That was his tragedy. He died of a broken heart because we weren't worthy of him. He was too far ahead, but he pronounced in those 14 points just about the most advanced idea ever uttered since the Sermon on the Mount, since Jesus Christ gave these things to the world. And then another thing happened during that First World War. The Germans and the English had, like a great vice, were crushing 20 million people who were going to starve to death. They were in Holland and in France. And Herbert Hoover was a Quaker. He was an engineer over there in Europe. And he went first to the British, with whom he had pretty good relations. He said, my country would like to save those 20 million people from starving. He had a hard time getting them to permit it, because they said, if you feed those people, the Germans will steal it, which was true. And then when he got their permission, he had to go over to the Kaiser. Being a Quaker, these Quakers can go most anywhere. And in spite of the fact the war was on, he was able to reach the ear of the Kaiser and persuade him to allow him to feed those 20 million people. One of the most miraculous things, I think, in the history of the world is the story of Herbert Hoover over there during that period. He saved those people's lives. More food went across the Atlantic Ocean than had ever happened in the history of the world before. Since then, well, we've been doing other things that are marvelous too, but never before that time. Quaker Hoover, with that Quaker background of his and his ability as an engineer, had achieved a miracle. Now, meanwhile, something else is happening in this world. That war was a part of it, but only a part of it. That wasn't a world war. That was an American-European war. A little outside, but not much. But the world was becoming one. Wendell Wilson went around the world, and when he got back, he wrote a book called One World. How many ever saw it? Quite a lot of you. And he was right. It was becoming one world. The airplane was doing it. In the olden days, it took so long to go anywhere that people never expected to come back. And when steamships started, it was a little bit better, but it still was a big world. Instead of one world, many worlds. But when the airplane came, and the radio, and fast automobiles, and good roads, and fast ships, and newspapers, and magazines, and the world began to be one. Now it's so easy to travel around the world. I've been around the world this year. It was easy to go. We started last February the 20th and got back about the last day of May and visited 21 countries. Not only visited them, but worked in them. That's how easy it is to go around the world today. Probably go around next year, and the next year, as long as I live, I don't know. Couldn't have been done in past years. John Armott went around the world about 7 times, and it was a miracle that he ever got around that often. And he was the most prodigious traveler of his time. But now, anybody who travels in an airplane goes millions of miles if he's an airplane pilot. Well, this world has become a small world now. This is one thing it did to us. It enabled us to see what other people are like. We went over there, we were good-hearted people, but we didn't know what they were like, and so we didn't feel anything about them. If somebody may be shrieking in a hospital here in this city, does it make you feel badly tonight? I'll tell you why, because you don't know it. You can't hear it. You can't hear very far. And the things that are close by are the things that keep us worried. If you hold a nickel up close to your eye, you can't see anything else but that. But if it's far away, it doesn't have to go very far away. You can't see it at all. And that's the way we were. But now, when we began to travel, and we began to read about these things, then the motion pictures showed us how people were. Then we began to get outraged, shocked, and it became intolerable to us with our ideas here in America to have the world like that. But even more important, this new one world produced by the rapid transportation that we have was helping them know how you are. They had never seen us before. Some of them now saw the motion pictures. More of them saw our soldiers, especially in the Second World War, when that was a real world war. And they saw our tourists, and they heard about our Declaration of Independence. They had heard from missionaries before. The missionaries are very conservative, careful people as a rule. Not very many of them get radical or dangerous, but our gospel is radical and dangerous. It's the worst dynamite the world ever saw. And you can't, no matter how conservative you are, if you hand that out to hungry people, poor people, destitute people, oppressed people, and they read the words of Jesus, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, He's anointed me to preach good tidings to them, to set at liberty these people that are bruised, that's dynamite. And it had got around, but they hadn't believed it. But now they saw us. There that we believe that all men have the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. They heard it from our Declaration of Independence. And those people began to change. I feel this very deeply because I've seen it myself. Ever since 1915, when Mrs. Laubach and I first went out to the Philippine Islands, I've been among those people. And when I went there at first, they were in a state of sullen despair because they were kept that way, not so much by force as by their own religions, which held them down, told them there was no hope. But now they began to hope. They still held the name Muslim, the Buddhist, Hindu, but they began to be Christian in their hope that they might rise out of their present condition. And they have changed in these last 35 and 40 years. In your lifetime, in the lifetime of all of you here, this world has changed so that 3/4 of the human race that used to be in a state of despair and hopelessness have changed now to great, grim determination to rise out of their misery. And they're reaching up a hand. They're saying, we'll take the hand of anybody who will help us up. That's the new situation in the world. You did that. A lot of communists who say they did it. They say they went out and stirred these people up. I'm not going to let the communists steal that honor from us. We did it. You did it with your religion, and you did it with your Declaration of Independence, and you did it by showing them what you're like. And it's a terrible thing to let the communists go and tell them that they're their emancipators. We must understand ourselves what we stand for, our religion and our government. Well, that was the way it was until the Second World War. They were gradually coming out of this state of despair, still calling themselves Hindus, but not Hindus in reality. I want to tell you something that will shock you. Prepare to be shocked. And maybe you'll be mad, I don't know. But I believe that Jesus Christ not only saves people, and not only saves a business from being bad to good, and a government from being bad to good, but he saves a religion. And I'll tell you a religion that he has saved, and that is Hinduism. It still calls itself Hinduism, but it's changed its nature. Mahatma Gandhi was down in South Africa. He was a lawyer. He met the most saintly Christian I ever saw, C.F. Andrews, now dead. Wonderful, wonderful, Christ-like. He'd been a perfect person for the CFO camp as a leader. He met him. Andrews was there for this strange reason. His understanding of Jesus led him to believe that he should go where people were in need and suffer with them and be their champion. It took him to an island off the coast of North Carolina where he thought the Negroes were being mistreated in America. Later it took him over to the Fiji Islands where he was for a long time. And then he went to South Africa where the Indians from India were being mistreated by the English. He was an Englishman. And he lived among those Indians, and every day he walked over to the British officials and pled with them to give right justice to the Indians. C.F. Andrews met him. Mahatma Gandhi, the young lawyer who was there to make money, met C.F. Andrews, who was there to plead for his countrymen. And Gandhi fell in love with Andrews, and then he fell in love with Andrews Christ, and then he began to read the New Testament, and he would have become a Christian if the Christians had been Christians. But he said, I can't stand it to call myself by the same name as the people who are oppressing my people and who are exploiting Asia and Africa as they are. And so he never called himself a Christian, but he was a truer Christian than perhaps anybody in this room, in his love of Jesus and in his belief in what Jesus said. Now, for one thing, Gandhi became infinitely compassionate for the masses, for the Harajan. He started a tremendous campaign to do the impossible. When he started this thing in India, there were castes, there were outcasts, there were 80 millions of them, untouchables. You couldn't get into their shadow. If they happened to touch anything that you had touched, you were defiled by them. They were not allowed to drink out of the same wells. They couldn't live in the same towns. They were outcasts. But he learned from Jesus to champion the untouchables of India. And today, while there are many of them yet mistreated in India, yet India is changing more rapidly in our attitude toward the untouchables than we are in our attitude toward the Negroes. And then another thing Gandhi did. Oh, by the way, India rather understands us. We should understand her better. She understands our Negro problem pretty well because she's got her own caste problem to solve. And the next place, Gandhi believed what very few Americans believe. He believed that love can set a country free, that you can trust it to win a war. And so he started what is known as nonviolent, loving, non-cooperation. The Indian people wanted to be free from England. They never resisted, if he could help it. They never shot a gun. The British shot them down and they took it. And he told them, keep on loving. And he went to the sea because there were laws that were unjust. One of them was you can't make salt in India. You've got to buy all your salt from England. So he went down to the sea and he took a little fire and he boiled the water and he made salt. And he was arrested and put in jail for that. But he did those things lovingly. And when he was in jail, he loved everybody. And he kept on loving, and he got India loving until India became free. The British just couldn't take it. And Mahatma Gandhi's spirit still marches on. And the spirit of India today in Nehru is the spirit of Mahatma Gandhi, and I think it's the spirit of Jesus Christ. That's the reason I said that Jesus Christ can even save a religion and leave it with the same name it had before. Hinduism is becoming Christian in a most amazing way. And I'll tell you, one of the men who has done a lot to help that too, that's Stanley Jones, who has been going up and down just preaching Jesus and his ideals to the Indian people. Well, then came, I shouldn't have talked to you so long tonight. I guess I'll finish this speech tomorrow night. I think I'll say a little more, though. Then came the Second World War. And that was a real world war. When Japan dropped those bombs on Pearl Harbor, then it was no longer a European war. It was an Asiatic, African, Pacific, Atlantic world war. And after that world war was over, that time our soldiers went everywhere. Then they saw us. We understood them. And then when that was over, something happened that has really brought compassion to the world. It was on the way, but now it happened. And I'll tell you what it was. Well, first of all, we had to do something about the terrible number of refugees and of starving people in Europe and all over Asia. And what's known as UNRWA was organized. Now, UNRWA made a lot of mistakes. But when you try to do a thing in a hurry, you will make mistakes. The first mistake it made was it did not realize that you had to have fine Christian people with a great love and a great integrity, or else your thing is going to break down. Nothing, no matter how good it is, can work unless good people work it. And UNRWA didn't succeed very well because the men we sent there didn't have enough of the Spirit of Jesus. But at any rate, it was necessary to do it in a hurry. But now came something more important than that. Now, I hadn't mentioned the Marshall Plan started at the same time to help Europe. But now came this. Do you remember, are you old enough, that about 10 years ago, over in a place called Yalta, in the southern part of Russia, our own President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill went to meet Joseph Stalin. And do you remember what they had, what they thought was a love feast? And Stalin, that arch crook of history, smiling said to those two men, "We will be friends forever." And we disarmed completely, almost. We believed him. And at that very moment, he had the plot that was the most tremendous success in the history of the world. He plotted to capture 1/4 of the human race. And he did. And he did it in 4 years, and that was China. In 4 swift years, right after he had promised to be our friends forever, he took China from us, made it communist. Now, he didn't do that with guns. There were guns, but he did it principally with propaganda, with lies. He went down through China and lied to her, and he could do it for this reason. China was wretchedly poor. 9/10 of the people were very unhappy. They wanted a change. They wanted to come up out of their poverty, their starvation, and their misery. And all the communists had to do was to train these liars to go down there and say, the rich are your enemies, kill them. The government's your enemy, Chiang Kai-shek is. Overthrow him. Go communist. Seize what the rich have, then you'll be rich. And it worked because they were hungry. Well, I will work with hungry people. My little people that I work with are so gullible, poor little things. I love them, but I know how easy they are to fool if you offer to help them. Because they're reaching up their hands in China like they were all over the rest of the world, asking, who will take my hand? And the communists came and promised and won. And then we began to see that we had to do something about that. Our own country did. We saw there wasn't enough just to save Europe. We had to save Asia. And so we started the point 4. A great many of us, I was one of them, were over in Asia at that time when China fell. And we were horrified. We knew that India and Burma and Siam and Indochina and Indonesia and all of the Near East could fall just as quickly as China. And we hurried back home. I was one of them. I can tell you a number of others. But I remember myself, no, you didn't see me, but people in New York did. I was a desperate man. I spoke down in Calvary Church, Sam Shoemaker's church, one night, almost frantic about this thing. And Helen Shoemaker, his wife, is the daughter of Senator Smith of New Jersey. And so his wife heard me. And Helen Shoemaker is some woman. When she believes anything, she believes it with all her might. And she said, come on, we're going to do something about this. I won't let you do this. Just talk. She went over to the phone with me. I remember I stood there by the phone while she called up Washington. And she said to her father, Dad, the president's got to hear this thing right away. And she was all on fire, nearly crying. And he said, well, what is it? And then she told him. She said, we're going to lose all Asia unless we get out there and help those people out of their poverty. They're going to believe the communists. So 2 weeks later, Senator Smith and Sam Shoemaker and I walked in to see Harry Truman, while Mrs. Shoemaker sat out there in the car and prayed with all her might. And they said to me, now you tell that story that you told up there. And so I told Harry Truman that story. And he listened for about half an hour. And then he said, man, you're talking religion. He said, if I promised that, the American people wouldn't back me. That needs a revival. You fellows go out and start a revival. That's religion. And of course it is. We walked out, we're looking down and saying, Harry Truman passed the buck. A year and a half later, however, he was reelected. And at his inaugural address, he said, point one, I forget it, so do you. Point two, I forget it. Point three, I don't know it. Then point four, we must lift the destitute and hungry peoples of the world out of their hunger and misery by sharing our technical knowledge. And it was exactly what the people who had been coming from Asia had told him. He believed it, and it went like wildfire around the world, everywhere excepting in America. We were wondering, but nobody else was. I was in Siam when that thing was published. Across the top of the paper, in big Siamese letters, was the announcement that America promised to help the world out of its poverty. And I believe that has had more influence. That great program of ours in saving the world from oil going the way China did in 4 years, I believe it would have gone the next 4 years if Harry Truman had not promised and the United States had not made good for their .4 program around the world. And it's 9 o'clock. Well, I'm going to finish this tomorrow night. It'll take me another half hour. Will you give me half an hour tomorrow night? Where are you? No. Huh? No, I don't think about it. I couldn't stand it that long. Too hot. But I just think we'll make a little finish instead of that. This isn't the finish, but it's something I ought to round this end of it out. I don't think that we're going to have an atomic war. Of course, if we do, and I'll meet you all in heaven, but we won't, any of us, remain here. And you can tell me I was wrong. But I'm going on the assumption that we don't have that. But I do know that we're in a terrific war right now. It's a war for men's hearts, for men's minds, the war between our Christian belief and the belief of atheism, the war between freedom and despotism, the war between the things that we believe in, and we've got to get into that war with all our might. And the one greatest question in the world today is, will America wake up soon enough before it's too late? I must say that although we've slowed down the progress of these of communism in these countries, I've been in 21 of them this year. I've been contacting the ministries of education in 21 of them, and I know what's going on. And I tell you, we haven't done enough yet to win the war to save the world. We've got to do more. The American government is doing more than the church is. The church is divided. It's asleep. It's not awake. And one of the things that I'm praying that the CFO camps will do will be to awaken the church to her obligation to get into this program in a larger way. You know how much you do for missions. You know that you give about 1 cent a day for foreign missions per capita in the American church today. And we have done all too little, and we can't change rapidly enough. But tomorrow I'll tell you the rest of that story. And in the meantime, I hope you'll pray. I don't apologize tonight for changing over from a talk about ourselves. We've been filled up until we're just about bursting or overflowing here this week, until I don't think any of us could stand much more filling. But God didn't bring us in here just to have a lovely religious spree. He brought us here to get us ready to do something for Him. And I think that before we leave here, we'll know what that something is. Let us pray. to be alive in such a day, to live to it, to give to it. We thank thee with a flaming heart that in it we can have a part. God help each one of us to know our part. There isn't anybody in the CFO, in any of the CFOs, whose heart isn't aflame to do something to help thee. Now give us not only the flame, but also the wisdom. Not only the burning heart, but also the clear thought, so that we may see clearly what thy will for us is before we leave these grounds. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, if you will show us what to do, we will rededicate our lives, and we will help thee save the world. We thank thee that we can. We thank thee for the honor. We thank thee for the glory of being called to do something to help thee. In Jesus' name, amen.